Welcome to Behind the Gate. Our guest today is Dr. Robert Weedon, a leader in high quality, high volume spay neuter surgery. Through SNP, the spay neuter instructional program, he's trained countless veterinarians to expand access to affordable, sustainable care without burning out the people doing the work. His career has stretched across private practice, shelter medicine, and academia, giving him a perspective that cuts through both the policy debates and the day-to-day grind. Dr. Weedon, welcome to Behind the Gate. Please introduce yourself and your work.
My name is Bob Weedon. I am a veterinarian, have been a veterinarian for 40 years. More specifically, I'm a high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter surgeon. I am retired from the faculty of the University of Illinois, where I trained students in high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter. I moved to Florida to be closer to my brother, who had retired and moved down here. He's the last living family I have. I thought I would play golf every day, but I realized after I'd been here a couple of months that I really didn't want to play golf. What I did miss was doing spay and neuter. I wrote an article about it that was published by Humane Pro entitled, "Why Play Golf When You Can Spay Cats?" I've been doing spay-neuter surgery since I moved to Florida in 2019 with a couple of different nonprofit organizations. And I think in that time, have probably sterilized over 30,000 animals here in Florida, about 5,000 a year. That's my ikigai. Loosely translated means your reason for being. There are four components. Do you love what you do? Which I clearly do. Are you good at it? I think so. I wrote a couple of chapters in the textbook, so I must know a little something about it. More importantly, does it benefit the community? And that to me is the overarching reason for what I do. It benefits the community. And the fourth one is, can you get paid for it? Well, that's not really important to me. I have a pretty good retirement setup, but it does give me beer money, I suppose. So, but those are the four components to ikigai, and spay-neuter is my ikigai.
What first pulled you into spay-neuter work? Was there a single moment when the scale of the overpopulation problem really hit you?
Well, if you go back to 2005, I had started doing spay-neuter on a volunteer basis. I was at the time in private practice and volunteering at our local animal control. I'd completed my Master of Public Health in 2005. At the time, the local animal control was not sterilizing animals prior to adoption. They were adopting them with a voucher in order to get the animal sterilized at the veterinarian of the adopter's choice. And an analysis of that voucher redemption revealed only a 50% redemption rate. And I happened to be out at animal control one day and talking to the director there, who was also a good friend of mine. And this lady brought in a box of puppies. And Jean knew her and said, "Where'd you get those puppies?" And she said, "Remember that dog I adopted last year?" Jean said, "You never got her spayed?" And she said, "No, I never got around to it." And I was reminded of a saying from the 70s or the 80s that said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I realized at that moment that we were part of the problem. And so we worked to build an on-site spay-neuter facility at the New Hanover County Animal Control Services. That was a project I was involved in called the Management Academy for Public Health. I was invited to be a community participant in a year-long program at the School of Public Health at Chapel Hill. And that's what got me interested in going back and completing my Master of Public Health. Our project was to design, plan, and build an on-site spay-neuter facility. We did, and then I volunteered there afterwards as a surgeon. And when I was still in private practice, we started sterilizing every animal that went out the door for adoption. And that really set me on the course to where I am today.
It's commonplace now that the animals are spayed or neutered before they're adopted out. Was it this project of yours that spread the word about how that was something that absolutely needed to happen? Or do you think it just
Well,
happened?
it was a small county in North Carolina. I'm sure that maybe it was impetus for other counties
Mhm.
to follow suit. I think that that's the best way to help combat the animal overpopulation problem is to not allow animals to be adopted that can reproduce. Most owners are responsible, and some small shelters have a voucher system like we had with the communication capabilities that are available now. Follow up's a lot easier. We didn't have some of the communication avenues that we now have 20 years ago. I think that there are still some small organizations that don't have an on site veterinarian or don't have access to spay neuter capability that are still doing vouchers. But obviously, the best way to prevent animal overpopulation is to not allow animals that are reproductively capable to be adopted.
Mhm. What is the
The problem we're having now is capacity. There's a dire shortage of high quality, high volume spay neuter surgeons throughout the country. High quality, high volume spay neuter is a lot different than spay neuter that's done in private practice. And when it first was developed, practitioners looked down on it saying, oh, they're cutting corners. They're not, practicing to the standards of care. That's not true. High quality, high volume spay neuter is protocol driven. You do the same thing the same way every time, and it's very efficient. That's why yesterday I sterilized, I don't know, 30 some animals, whereas the average private practitioner might maybe sterilize two or three during a day. We're just very efficient with our protocols and how the staff, how it's literally like an orchestra. Everybody has a function, they know their function, they do their function, and they do it well. It includes monitoring of patients, recovery, not just prep and surgery. It's incredibly efficient. But there's a shortage of veterinarians trained in these techniques. So there are a number of organizations around the country that are looking to find a high quality, high volume spay neuter surgeon. One of the things I do is I train veterinarians who are interested in learning these high quality, high volume spay neuter techniques. The average private practitioner may take 45 minutes to spay a cat. It takes me about 6 minutes. And there are people that are faster than me. It's not uncommon to hear of a 3 or 4 minute cat spay.
How do you do it
Um,
so quickly? What is the difference? Talk to me like I'm an
well,
idiot.
it's all about technique. For one thing, we make a very small incision because closure is a big part of the time involvement. I remember when I graduated from veterinary school, one of the surgery residents trained me to make a large incision. He said, look around the abdomen, make sure there's nothing bad in there. You owe your clients a diagnosis. Well, that made sense, 40 years ago. But now, when I've got 30 animals to sterilize in the course of a day, the smaller the incision, the more quickly I can close it so I can go on to the next one. And there are other time saving techniques, like we were trained when I was in veterinary school to use what's called a three clamp technique, where you exteriorize the ovarian pedicle and put three clamps on it and two ligatures. Now we use what's called a Miller's knot, which is a very secure ligature. It's used to close bags of flour. One of them takes the place of two standard ligatures using the old three clamp technique. We don't even put ligatures on the ovarian pedicles. We do what's called an ovarian pedicle tie, which is when you exteriorize the ovary, take a clamp, wrap it around itself, clamp it, and then slide that over the end of the clamp. It makes its own knot, and you make sure it's good and secure, and boom, you're done. You don't have to clamp it, pass a ligature. It's very quick.
So, are
And
private practice veterinarians not being taught these techniques?
I don't think so. Now, I have trained a lot of private practice veterinarians. I've got a colleague of mine from North Carolina who came down to Florida, spent a couple of days with me, and learned these techniques. I texted her the other day to see how she was doing. And she said, "Oh, I love my pedicle ties, because it's so much quicker." It took her before about 25, 30 minutes to spay a cat. And now she says she's down to under 10 minutes. So consider this. She cut her surgery time in half, so she can do twice as many during the course of a day. Now take it one step further. If she has to generate a certain amount of income to pay the staff and the bills and generate some income for herself, by doing twice as many surgeries, she can actually charge her clients less and still generate the funding that's needed to support the practice as well as generate some income. If she needs to make $1,000 an hour and she's doing 2 surgeries an hour, then she needs to charge $500 per surgery. But if she can do 4 an hour, she'll still make the same income, but she only needs to charge $250. Now, gets really good and can do 5 an hour and still charge $250. She's actually going to generate more income than she did before, but she's going to be charging her clients half of what she was charging before.
So are you working on ways to get this knowledge out?
I'm on a task force convened by the United Spay Alliance called the Veterinary Shortage Task Force. We have information available and scheduled wet labs around the country to train veterinarians who might be interested in learning these techniques in order to become more efficient as a surgeon and then thereby sterilizing more animals over the course of a day. Using the little math example we just talked about, they can generate as much, if not more, income while sterilizing more animals.
Staffing is the biggest bottleneck right now in scaling the high quality, high volume spay neuter programs. Is there
well, let's see. Funding is an issue. 10 years ago, animal welfare had a focus on, funding spay-neuter because they realized this is a way to help stem the tide of animal overpopulation. But that's changed, and the focus now in animal welfare is on access to care. And funding is all but dried up for spay-neuter because it's all being used to increase access to care. I believe that spay-neuter is an essential element of access to care.
I would think the same thing, yes.
Because so many of the animals that I sterilize on a daily basis have never been to a veterinarian before. This allows us to get them started, not only to get them sterilized, but also to get them started on a lifetime of wellness and prevention. You get a 6-month-old dog that comes in to be spayed. It's never had any vaccines, never been on heartworm preventative. You can get these vaccines done. You can explain to the owner the need for heartworm preventative if you're in an area, which I am here in Florida, where heartworms are prevalent, and get the animal started on heartworm preventative on a monthly basis for essentially the rest of its life, that they would never have had the opportunity had they not come in to get the animal sterilized in the first place.
That makes sense.
So that's an issue, funding. I'm working with a fairly new nonprofit organization, and we could certainly use funding for additional surgery tables, additional surgery lights, and additional anesthesia machines. Unfortunately, there are no funding sources out there to help with that. So we have to be very careful and try to conserve income to put towards a fund. If I sterilized 30 animals yesterday, if we had 2 surgeons working, we could sterilize 60 animals.
Do you have the equipment that you need?
Yep, we have the space. We don't have the equipment. That's the thing. We need a couple of more surgery tables. We need a couple more surgery lights. We need a couple more anesthesia machines. Of course, we would need more surgical instruments because Each animal gets its own sterile pack. So those instruments have to be cleaned, repackaged, and autoclaved. So that takes time. And so if you have a limited number of packs, then you're limited in the number of surgeries you can.
Do licensing and regulations often hold vets back from helping where they're needed?
It does. For example, let's say a high quality, high volume spay neuter surgeon lives in North Florida. There's a community in Georgia that needs a high quality, high volume spay neuter surgeon, but they can't cross that state border and provide surgery without getting a Georgia veterinary license. When I retired and moved to Florida, I had an Illinois license because that's where I came from, but did not have a Florida veterinary license. So I couldn't do spay neuter. I had to get a Florida veterinary license. And it was somewhat of an arduous process. It was expensive. Plus, I had to get this. I'd been licensed in one, two, three, four, 5 states prior to moving to Florida. But yet, Florida had to see a copy of my veterinary school transcripts. Now, do you not think that maybe one of these former states had inspected my transcripts? That's called license by endorsement. If you're licensed in another state, then some states will, you have to maybe take a local state laws test, but they will accept that and grant you their own state license. I worked with a couple of politicians, and we did pass House Bill 719 back in 2023 that gives an exemption to licensure to a veterinarian who is licensed and in good standing in another state in order to perform sterilization procedures and wellness procedures on a volunteer basis in the state of Florida. I'm not crazy about that wording because volunteer basis means they're not going to work for a private practice that's generating income and not get paid for it, but they can work for a nonprofit. But consider this, we've got Florida, we've got this thing called snowbirds. They may spend half their time in Florida during the winter where it's not quite as cold. Where are you located,
In
Kira?
Mississippi.
It's not like you're in Massachusetts where you get tons of snow,
No.
but there are veterinarians that come down from the north, retired or semi-retired, and with this exemption, they can now do spay neuter in Florida as long as they're licensed and in good standing in another state. So we're working to help alleviate that. I'm hoping that the legislature will eventually eliminate that volunteer only verbiage because, if I were a retired or semi-retired veterinarian from New York and I was wintering in Florida, I might want to do spay neuter for a private practitioner a couple of days a week
Right.
and generate a little bit of income. So I think the concern was that these vets are going to come down and, set up practice. Well, they're not because the exemption specifically states that they're not eligible for a premises permit and they must practice under the supervision of a licensed Florida veterinarian. Georgia has just recently passed some similar language. There's a 6-month limit on it. The point is that states are starting to see this legislation and thinking, okay, maybe we can make an exemption to increase capacity in our state.
Well, it sounds like you have the whole process automated pretty well. If you could wave a wand and automate another part of the spay neuter process or the clinic operations, what would you do?
I think there are a couple of things that consume a lot of staff time and are tedious. That's data entry and record keeping. Both are tedious and consume a lot of staff time. But accurate data is crucial to maintaining a good medical record. So it has to be done. Anything along that line that could be automated accurately, would help alleviate that bottleneck. Now, and we've talked before about how maybe AI could help in this instance. I've been thinking perhaps AI could help with appointment scheduling, maybe even the check-in and check-out process. Those are a couple of areas where artificial intelligence could help streamline the whole
Hmm.
process. I don't think we're going to get AI to be able to spay cats, but
That's for sure.
you
Think
know, I mean,
safe.
we can do that. That's what I'm good at, but I'm not good at data entry. I'm not good at sitting there typing on a keyboard, which I do have to do on occasion. I had a little kitty yesterday that was in a foster setting and had been attacked by a dog and needed to have a limb amputated. Since that's not a routine surgery, I have to enter in specifically what I did. So those kind of things that we've automated some of the spay neuter data entry with, like the surgeons check their preferences for suture type and suture pattern and that sort of stuff. The staff just, has little boxes they check, which does help speed things up. But for some of the weird things, we still have to hand enter a lot of the information.
Why do you think the AI and automation hasn't been implemented yet in your clinic?
Well, I think there's a fear of the unknown. And there are a lot of people out there that think computers are going to take over the world or eliminate my job. And I mean, there's the fear of the unknown. And I think that as we get more comfortable with this, where was I the other day? Oh, I was in a Zoom meeting. I'm on the board of directors of the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs. And we've got a big project that we're working on, AI in order to help. We've got this huge database of research studies and working on using AI to kind of organize that and be able to, when somebody has a question, be able to generate a reasonable answer. And one of our board members was talking about an attorney, I believe, out in California that had filed a brief that was written completely with AI. There were 60 citations and 59 were incorrect. This guy ended up, being disbarred because he did that.
Mhm.
And so I think, I joke because I have a colleague of mine that graduated from veterinary school a couple of years after me, and she posted something on Facebook the other day, said, I graduated from veterinary school without a cell phone, without the internet, and without artificial intelligence. And I kind of laughed at that because I did too. But I think there is potential to harness this resource, this tool, to benefit what we do and make our lives easier. But the fear of the unknown is a big thing. People are really reluctant to embrace things that they don't understand.
Sure,
And
sure.
it's human nature.
What is the hardest season you've lived through in this field, and what would you say it revealed about the system itself?
For me, it's really not the actual practice of veterinary medicine that creates burnout. I'll be honest. Days that I'm scheduled to do surgery, I bound out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm so excited. But what's really the hardest season for me is battling the politics of regulation. For instance, I'm currently battling our county commissioners regarding the management of community cats in our county. Our sheriff, who's an avid bird photographer and the self-proclaimed Florida's sheriff, refuses to embrace evidence-based management of community cats. All of our surrounding counties have TNVR friendly animal ordinances, and it has increased their live release rate exponentially because they're not just trapping unadoptable cats, sticking them in the shelter, waiting the requisite holding period where the cat's terrified being in a cage, and then killed. They're recognizing that these are feral cats. They're sterilizing them, vaccinating them against rabies, tipping their ear so they can be identified as a sterilized community cat. They go back out to the colony from where they came. These colonies are managed by colony caretakers who provide resources, food, and studies have shown that colony cats that are provided resources have less predation on wildlife because They don't have to.
Mm.
They've got a meal right there, and they've been sterilized, so they're not running around trying to breed. Think about an old tomcat that's been neutered. He has no desire to breed anything. He just had a meal provided by his caretaker. He's going to lay down, take a nap in the sun rather than go out and chase birds around. The county commissioners refuse to embrace evidence-based models of community management. I've argued that they should remove animal control from underneath the sheriff's office and make it a separate county entity, as Hillsborough County, where Tampa is, has done, run by individuals well versed in shelter management and animal population control. Hillsborough County has been doing this since 2012, and their live outcome rate has gone from the 60% range to 95%. Polk County, the county I'm in, we're still mired in the upper 50s.
What is the mental
Uh,
block? Why is there some opposition to this?
Because the sheriff is an avid bird photographer. He has stated there will never be TNVR in Polk County. And I have corresponded with him. I've requested meetings with him. He refuses to meet with me personally. He sends one of his lackeys, and they say PETA doesn't support TNVR, nor does the American Bird Conservancy. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, these aren't really mainstream animal welfare organizations.
Right.
There are numerous peer-reviewed publications. I'm thinking of one that, let me find the quote here. It's kind of hilarious, actually. My colleague, Peter Wolf, who works for Best Friends, and I wrote an article entitled An Inconvenient Truth. Targeted TNR enjoys a track record unmatched by lethal methods for managing free-roaming cats, published in the Journal of Shelter Medicine and Community Animal Health in November of 2023. That discusses efforts to undermine TNR programs. We say in the article, as the evidence presented here makes clear, efforts to manage free-roaming cat populations using lethal methods are often misguided and counterproductive, as are efforts to undermine TNVR programs. We have cited so much scientific evidence. Grady refuses to embrace this scientific evidence because he's an avid bird photographer and he believes the cats don't belong in the environment and we should just trap them and kill them. Well, Kira, we've been trapping and killing cats for decades and it hasn't solved the problem. That to me is the biggest source of frustration and burnout. I mean, I'm involved with a local group that, we've been advocating. I've made 3 presentations to the Board of County Commissioners. No questions, no discussion, no action. I'm starting to get burned out on that because I feel like, remember the TV show Grey's Anatomy?
Mm.
Meredith once said, why do we beat our head against the wall? Because it feels so good to stop. That's kind of where I am now with this. Maybe I should just move to a different county that is more progressive and embraces this because
Right.
the commissioners have the authority to amend the animal ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They will do it because Grady, he'll wave his hand and they will not be reelected. He is literally the most powerful person in Polk County, Florida. He just refuses to look at the evidence and change his mind.
Mm. If resources weren't a constraint, what would an ideal high-quality, high-volume spay-neuter surgery network look like in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm unsure that I understand what sort of network you're referring to. Are you talking about a network of veterinarians that helps one another or a network of resources to assist agencies?
Clinics.
I think there are some rudimentary networks. I mean, there's Association of Shelter Veterinarians, and there's on Facebook, there's high quality, high volume spay neuter veterinarians Facebook page. And, people post pictures and ask questions all the time, which I think is good to help disseminate information. In terms of resources, I wish that animal welfare funders would see the value in supporting spay neuter because starting a high quality, high volume spay neuter clinic it's an expensive proposition. to get things going and having some financial support to get the ball rolling. I remember when I was in Illinois, we had a mobile spay neuter unit we used to take to rural shelters, and the students would do sterilization surgeries, and the shelters would get the benefit of having the surgeries done. It was a real win-win partnership. One of the shelter managers asked me, where can I put in a grant request for support for spay neuter? I suggested this was the time when ASPCA, HSUS, were all supporting spay neuter. And he goes, what about the government? And I said, well, I'm not aware of any governmental programs that support spay neuter. He goes, in my day job, I get governmental support. I guess he ran the local boys club for after school care for at-risk kids. The government supports that because we're talking about children. But the federal government does not have any program to support spay neuter. Some states do, like Florida, you can get a license plate that, spay and neuter license plate, and the additional charge goes into a fund, and they award grants to various members of the community. The biggest impediment, I think, is startup funding. When I was talking to this guy at the shelter, I said, look, even if you were to get grant funding, you're going to have to show sustainability. Nobody's going to grant you money to start a program if you can't make it sustainable.
Right.
Sustainability is key into longevity of a low-cost spay-neuter clinic. You have to generate enough income to keep the doors open, and that is done, through efficiency. And also, unfortunately, it's done because the support staff generally don't make as much as they do in a private practice setting, which then leads to, people leaving and going to private practice because, they get paid better. So it's a challenge, but I think if done properly and managed properly, once you get set up, you can, being efficient, generate sustainable income to keep the doors open.
What gives you hope right now, whether it's emerging innovations or policy changes or the next generation of vets?
Yeah. Well, for me, I mentioned I'm on the board of directors of the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs. From the perspective of animal population control, I am excited to be part of the development of a true non-surgical sterilant. Because imagine for a moment if we set up a large-scale community cat clinic on a Saturday. We've got 2 surgeons operating and the support staff. People are trapping these cats. We sterilize them, and we can only do so many because it requires anesthesia, surgery, recovery. If we had an injectable, and there's work being done now, I'm pretty confident when I say that within the next 5 years, we will have an FDA-approved non-surgical sterilant on the market. But imagine for a moment, if we had this tool in our toolbox, how many cats we could sterilize with just an injection as opposed to surgery in the course of a day. And you don't have to
be in the hundreds.
Some of the high quality, high volume spay-neuter surgeons that are certainly better than I am or faster than I am, they can do 50 cats a day. So say they could do 100 with surgical sterilization. We could easily, just by giving them an injection, we could sterilize 500 in the course of a day.
And you think that's going to happen within the next 5 years?
I do.
Wow.
I know that there are projects being worked on around the country that are starting to go through the FDA approval process.
And would that be available for private pet owners as well, not just the high volume clinics?
Yeah. I mean, the big problem is going to be the cost of, producing the product. I don't know if you're familiar with the Michelson Prize and Grants program, but Gary Michelson, a wealthy California philanthropist, has put up a $25 million prize for the researcher who comes up with the first true non-surgical sterilant that's effective in dogs and cats, males and females. We backed that up with $50 million in grant funding for the research.
Wow.
Gary is committed to, one of the reasons he did the prize, he wants to own the IP
Mhm.
because he wants to support the production. He doesn't want to generate income from making this. He wants to produce it as cost effectively as possible
Mhm.
so that it's going to be available widely. And, yeah, if somebody comes up with something, but it's $100,000 a dose, that's not going to
That's
work.
not you're right.
Some of the newer human technologies that have come out using gene therapy. So, this has to be affordable. It's got to be stable in the environment, ideally not requiring refrigeration, because think about street dog populations where you may go into small communities, you may not even have electricity.
Right.
And so it's got to be effective, stable, reasonably priced. And honestly, it's got to be fairly simple
Mm.
to administer. I mean, if you've got to mix component A with component B and let it sit for 45 minutes and then add component C, and you know, you get into a
Something's
problem
gonna mess
because
up.
some add component C and it's not going to work or whatever. And so it's got to be idiot proof,
Right.
for lack of a better term. And I know that Gary wants to support this so that whatever product does get FDA approved is going to be, meet those criteria.
Mhm.
It's going to be effective in males and females, dogs and cats. It's going to be stable in the environment, effective, and easy to administer.
Mhm.
Now, that said, there are unintended consequences. For instance, what do you think the population in the United States that would benefit most by a non-surgical sterilant is?
Oh, I see what you're saying. For your
Yeah,
good.
well,
Mhm.
for me, the obvious answer is community cats.
Mhm.
Feral and free roaming
Mhm.
cats. Right now, we're keeping them, surgically sterilizing them. So they have to undergo anesthesia, the time of surgery, the recovery time. How do we identify a sterilized community cat? We
Tip
tip
the
their
ears,
ear.
yes.
That's a universally recognized symbol that the cat's been
Mhm.
sterilized. Problem is, we don't have to anesthetize them. We can't cut the tip of their ear off.
True.
So, this is something the ACC&D recognized early on, and we've been working on a project to identify community cats that have been non-surgically sterilized without having to cut the tip of their ear off.
What's the
We're working on a method of tattooing them
Yeah.
that would be visible. We've been working on this project for 6 years. Ideally, we wanted to have a tattoo ink that would fluoresce.
Mhm.
So, like at night, we could shine a fluorescent light and see it, but the fluorescent ink just doesn't last.
Mm.
But we have hit on something that does apply an ink tattoo to the inside of the ear. My cat's not around, but he's got a tattoo on the inside of his ear. We tattooed him 5 years ago with an early prototype, and it's still visible.
Mhm.
Our thinking is that an ear tattoo would be visible on a cat in a trap. It may not be visible from a distance, but a lot of times ear tips aren't either.
Right.
So you get it in the trap. Oh, it's got a tipped ear. Okay, we know it's already been done. Let it go. Applying it is a whole nother story because feral cats are not handleable.
Right.
So I think what we've decided on is that we would have to give them some sort of chemical restraint
Mhm.
to relax them. But that would actually be beneficial in terms of
Given
giving
this
the
yes,
injection.
yes.
So you're not having to stab them and
Mhm.
they jump and
Mhm.
get it all. So we give them a little something to relax them, give them the sterilant, tattoo the ear, and it's a system that ACC&D has developed. It's really idiot proof. And we're actually now starting to promote it for use among private practitioners that are doing surgical sterilization. Because did you know that only 5% of private practitioners sterilize or tattoo animals that they sterilize?
5%. That's not many.
Yeah.
Mm.
Whereas virtually all the high quality, high volume spay neuter clinics and shelters and rescues, all of them tattoo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So an animal gets relinquished to a shelter. It's got a mark on its abdomen
Mm-hmm.
that shows we don't need to open this animal up. And I can't tell you the number of times I've opened an animal up that's already been
Oh,
sterilized.
God, you hate that.
So actually, you got a parallel project where we're working on developing. The reason veterinarians don't like to tattoo is it's messy. We're using livestock tattoo ink, which is gooey and it gets on everything and it's a pain in the ass to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So we've developed this system that's they don't have to handle the ink and it's a microneedle patch in an application device. You hold it against the abdomen, press a button, it's spring loaded, boom, applies the tattoo. No muss,
Easy.
no fuss. Yeah. And so we're actually testing that now. I've got several private practitioners in my area trialing it to see what works and what doesn't. We're going to work on starting next year commercializing it so we can start getting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that we're thinking this injectable sterilant's going to be wonderful, but there are unintended
Right,
consequences.
right.
We
So
can no
many
longer.
interesting. Is there anything you wish more people understood about what you do?
I would have to say probably my passion for supporting trap, neuter, vaccinate, return programs. Because the evidence shows that long term and properly applied, just trapping an occasional cat's not going to solve the problem. But if you're targeting, say you've got a mobile home park that's got a feral cat problem, and you really target that mobile home park, once you get 70% of the cats sterilized, then the population will actually start to drop. I wish people understood more that is an effective way to deal with the community cat overpopulation problem. But here's another thing. Consider this. There's a whole nother aspect of TNVR programs that people don't think about. I've been advocating this for years that we refer to it as TNVR rather than just
Mm-hmm.
TNR, because the V accentuates the fact that we're vaccinating these cats primarily for rabies.
Mm-hmm.
In doing so, we create a barrier to the disease between wildlife, domestic pets, and people.
Right.
If you think back to the COVID days, the concept of herd immunity,
Mm-hmm.
you know, play in a colony of feral cats. You do not have to vaccinate every single cat in the colony to have herd immunity. Even if you only have 50% of them vaccinated, you're still not going to see an increase in the number of cases. When animal control traps one of those previously vaccinated cats and removes it, and then it's replaced by a non-vaccinated cat, you weaken that herd immunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wish would be that people would understand that and just not trap and remove cats that have been part of a TNVR program,
Right.
because that in effect weakens the herd
That
immunity.
makes absolutely. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you wanted to?
Can't think of anything. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to answer your questions. I hope I've answered them
You have.
sufficiently.
I've learned a lot today.
I wish that I could think of better ways for AI to be implemented in high quality, high volume spay neuter. But I think the things we've talked about certainly make sense to automate some of those rather tedious tasks. I appreciate your support by having me on. Clearly, you get it. Maybe people who hear you speak and listen to this podcast will also get the benefit of not only spay neuter, but also community cat management.
Right. Where can people learn more about the work you do?
I don't think they want to learn more about me, but
I think you're a pretty interesting guy. Don't sell yourself short.
I mentioned the Alliance for Contraception in Cats and Dogs. They have a really informative website, d-d.org. Also, the United Spay Alliance. And I'm gonna have to look that one up because I don't remember. Oh, it's United Spay Alliance, all one word, .org. And I mentioned them because they have an initiative I'm in strong support of called the Feline Fix by 5 campaign. And the idea is to start sterilizing primarily female cats, but both males and females, by 5 months of age, because we know that cats can come in heat that young.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a picture on my phone of a 4-month-old kitten that I spayed a couple of weeks ago that was recently pregnant, 4
4
months
months
old.
old. Oh my goodness.
It had like 5 fetuses in its young uterus.
Mm.
And so the Fix by 5 program is trying to get the word out to primarily cat owners that, hey, get your cat spayed before it comes into heat,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want one of those oops pregnancies.
Right, right.
So those are the 2 places that people can learn more.
Great. Well, thank you so
As you
much for being on here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Do you know what the Latin derivation of the word doctor is? Docere, which means to teach. And like a docent
Yes.
in a museum.
Yes.
And I used to share that with my students when I was at Illinois, because I wanted them to understand that one of their jobs was to educate their clients to their best ability regarding the care of their animal.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an important reason, because they didn't get to where they are in a vacuum. Somebody mentored them or helped them along the way. And so I challenged them, when they were graduating, look, you didn't get here on your own. You need to help the next generation.
Right.
And if you think about the Latin derivation of the word doctor literally means to teach, then they have that obligation to mentor the next generation of veterinarians.
Right. Dr. Weedon, thank you for sharing both the hard truths and the hope in this work. These conversations remind us that lasting change in the pet industry isn't just about passion, it's about systems that actually hold up under the weight of real life. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Behind the Gate. If you found today's episode valuable, please share it with someone who cares about making veterinary care more sustainable. We'll see you next time.